Ukraine's new domestically produced cruise missile has shown it can now strike further into Russian territory, reaching as far as St. Petersburg, Moscow, and the Caucasus oil fields. Euromaidan Press media outlet says that the debut of the long Neptune missile not only devastated a massive Russian oil refinery, but also signaled a new phase in the war where no high-value Russian target is truly safe. The Ukrainians launched a major missile strike on the strategic Russian oil refinery in Tuapse, causing a large fire, burning over 1,000 square meters of the refinery. Tuapse oil refinery is one of Russia's largest refineries, as it can produce up to 12 million tons of oil annually, dealing damage to both the Russian economy and military needs. Initially, the explosion was blamed on drone strikes, but doubts emerged as the Ukrainian General Staff confirmed that they were using a new version of the Neptune missile, debuting the long Neptune with an extended range payload and guidance system. According to official statements, the long Neptune has a 150 kilogram warhead. However, based on the size of the explosion and damage to the target, several analysts have speculated that this could be as much as 300 kilograms. Additionally, the Ukrainian General Staff stated that the long Neptune has an improved range of up to 1,000 kilometers compared to the 300 kilometers of the previous version. However, future deep strikes might prove different. Euromaidan Press says that for comparison, the American ATACMS missiles had a maximum range of 300 kilometers and a payload of 250 kilograms of explosive failure. German Taurus cruise missiles range 500 kilometers, 2 times less than the new Ukrainian long Neptune. The most significant restriction in Ukrainian strike capabilities is the limited deliveries and permissions tied to these Western weapon systems. However, as the long Neptune is domestically produced, this means that besides a massively increased range, Ukraine has now gained self-sufficiency regarding cruise missiles to use for strikes against high-value Russian targets. Euromaidan Press states that besides oil refineries, the new long Neptune missile can strike most of the strategic Russian military infrastructure, including critical command centers in Moscow, Rostov, Volgograd, and St. Petersburg. Furthermore, this allows the Ukrainians to more effectively strike Russian military and air bases that they could only attack with drones before, most notably the Engels, Yeysk, Astrakhan, and Morozovsk strategic air bases, which Russians used to launch strategic bombers to conduct strikes on Ukrainian civilian and military targets. If Ukrainians launch a major Neptune strike campaign against Russian airfields, the Russian Air Force would have to withdraw from their air bases and halt or heavily reduce their air support over Ukraine, relieving both Ukrainian frontline soldiers and military infrastructure and logistics in the rear. On top of critical air bases, the Ukrainians could now also strike ammunition depots, warehouses, and critical infrastructure, along with higher-level command posts located further in the rear, majorly disrupting Russian offensive operations. However, Russians cannot move their assets further away than they already are without the distance to the front line being too far, meaning that the ever-so-centralized Russian army would need to decentralize its essential military infrastructure. Besides being unfeasible in and of itself, such a massive operation would create huge issues and disruption and expose new weaknesses along with it. Overall, the Ukrainians launched their first demonstrative strike with long Neptune missiles, inflicting severe damage to one of the largest Russian oil refineries, which now poses an even greater risk to the most critical Russian military infrastructure. President Zelenski also announced that the Ukrainian military-industrial complex will produce 100,000 long-range munitions of various types, including the long Neptune cruise missiles. This even further underscores the massive achievement of Ukraine, as Ukrainians will now be able to strike valuable and critical Russian assets deep in the rear with domestically produced cruise missiles on a massive scale never seen before. Those F-16 fighters that arrived in Ukraine must first adapt to work in a combat zone. Ukrainian military expert Konstantin Krivolap noted on the air of the telethon, commenting on information about the arrival of several more aircraft in Ukraine. According to him, F-16 pilots must adjust, get used to these machines, and time is also needed to establish normal interaction between service and technical personnel. Increasing the number of aircraft also means increasing the number of places for storing them, landing and changing airfields. There are many infrastructure problems here, the expert noted. At the same time, Krivolap emphasized that despite all the problems created by US President Donald Trump, the F-16s continue to operate effectively in Ukraine. Good interaction between the MiG-29, F-16 and Mirages in the distribution of zones of influence and tasks when performing specific missions overlapping each other. That is, some drop bombs and others provide cover so that there are no missile strikes, the expert explained. At the same time, Krivolap did not specify what problems Trump created, but it is likely that he is talking about the decision to suspend aid to Ukraine. Recently, President Volodymyr Zelenski announced that several more F-16 fighters had arrived in Ukraine. At the same time, the head of state did not disclose the exact number of fighters that were added to the capabilities of the Ukrainian Air Force and did not specify which countries they came from. As is known, several countries are providing Ukraine with F-16 fighters. Among these countries are Denmark and the Netherlands. Thus, in early February, Ukraine received a batch of F-16 aircraft from the Netherlands. Then, Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov announced the arrival of the first Mirage 2000. According to him, these aircraft will perform combat missions, strengthening defense and the ability to effectively resist Russian aggression. Belgium is also supposed to hand over the aircraft. However, it has recently become known that this process is being delayed. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever stated that combat-ready fighters could be delivered as early as 2026. It is known that at the end of 2023, Belgium announced that 30 American F-16 fighters would be transferred to Ukraine. The country took this step because it had acquired a new generation of fighters, the F-35. The first aircraft were planned to be transferred by the end of last year. Media reported earlier that Ukrainian F-16 pilots are becoming bolder, which is why the threat to Russia's Su-34 is growing. With the help of improved tactics, Ukraine is trying to neutralize the F-34's heavy bombing capabilities, reducing their combat effectiveness and undermining Russian aviation.